So on behalf of Encore, who's very proud to be the sponsor of this stage and these topics that we're talking about, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speakers and our final speakers. Dr. Panos Moutafis, did I say that right? I said that right. You always get it wrong, and people always get my name wrong too. By the way, he's a real doctor. Last night we had the Doctor of Love in John Legend, but this is legit. This is a real doctor, real Ph.D. coming onto the stage. So get ready for this. He has 12 years of experience in ethical artificial intelligence and is the CEO and co-founder of Zenus. 12 years, by the way, 12 years is like the start of this thing. So he's been with artificial intelligence like very, very early on. So this is the real deal coming. He received his Bachelor of Science in Statistics from Athens University of Economics and Business in Greece, and his Ph.D. in Computer Science from the University of Houston. Panos has dozens of publications in leading journals and conferences, and a book chapter in face recognition across the imaging spectrum. He has been internationally recognized as an expert in ethical face analysis with published articles in the Harvard Business Review and Journal of Marketing Research. His distinctions include a TEDx talk and a Best Paper Award by the IEEE Homeland Security Conference, Biometrics, Forensic and Physical Security. So legit, seriously legit. Interviewing him is another very legit guy who you may have seen on this stage previously, and that is Adam Parry. He's the editor of Event Industry News, a leading online publication covering the latest news, trends, and in the events industry. With over a decade of experience and passion for all things events, Adam has established himself as a top thought leader in the field, providing insights, commentary, and analysis on the latest developments for the meetings and events industry. This is a serious session. So it's your last chance, everyone out in the district, to get in here and learn about AI and biometrics and better, more targeted experiences. Let's make a ton of noise for these guys as they come up on the stage and inspire some more people to come over and join us as we start to explore. Please put your hands together for Panos and Adam.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the last day and for spending this next 40 minutes or so with us. I think, first of all, what I would say is if anybody has any questions, please feel free to use Anthony or to get that interjection so we can actually ask them at that moment in time. Panos has some slides, so as we go through this conversation, you'll be able to kind of see more detail about what we're talking about and different things. But first of all, can I just get a show of hands? Does anybody currently use any type of facial recognition or facial so we already have somebody who's pioneering in the way of what I think, but really do believe is going to be a huge part of how we design events and how we understand the behavior of our audience and design better experiences for them going forward. So Panos, let's jump straight into it. Can we, I guess, start off with the difference between facial recognition and facial analysis?
Absolutely, but before we start, we had a discussion with Adam beforehand, and I said, ask me hard questions, like try to push me as much as possible, because this is how we're going to get the most value out for the audience. So starting off, facial analysis and facial recognition, we try to distinguish these two. Facial recognition is the ability to take a face from a picture or video, convert it into a unique signature, and then use this unique signature to distinguish individuals. So the goal is to identify and distinguish individuals. Now, facial analysis is a much more broad term, and you can do many things from a person's face. Like when we look at faces, we understand many things. It can be demographics, it can be sentiment, it can be how many people are in the audience, it can be dwell time, and so forth. So as long as you use the technology in a way that doesn't identify people, then all the privacy requirements, all the privacy concerns, they are a bit mitigated to a certain extent, and we will cover this as we go through. But this is an important distinction. There's facial analysis, which is soft biometrics within quotes, and then there is the identifiable information to use to distinguish individuals.
Do you think that the whole people actually understand the difference and how they distinguish?
No, and that's why we're here, Adam,
okay.
to explain it and educate people. Because it is nuanced, and if you don't care about it, you will never get to understand it and learn it. In our experience, most people, you usually have two categories. Some people say, I don't care. Does it make my life better? Does it make it easier? Is it on my iPhone? Is it on my Surface to be able to log in easier? So most people don't care. But the goal is to be informed because this is an important topic.
And one final before we move on, do you think we'll see facial recognition at events as well?
So it is being used, and actually there was a very big deployment recently. It was in Rye, Amsterdam. I think it was the IBC. It was about 50,000 people, and more than half they enrolled and checked in with face recognition at the event, and they had an amazing experience. So yeah, it is being used, but again, it has to be used properly with consent, with proper security and privacy safeguards.
Okay, so I think the next one is we're going to compare now. Could you just walk us through some of the differences and the benefits and pros and cons?
Perfect, absolutely. So the first one, which is very important, is accuracy. So with face recognition, usually it is a little bit harder to distinguish individuals. If you see a room with 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people, you will have many of them that they kind of look alike. And when you take into consideration the quality of the images, somebody might submit a photo from 5, 10, 20 years ago, it gets harder and harder to distinguish individuals as you go through. Whereas with the demographics, sentiment, and so forth, these are universal. And an example I'm using is the following. Let's say you go to a grocery store, and I ask you to distinguish apples from oranges. Very easy to do.
Yeah.
But if you go again the next week, and I tell you which oranges are the same with the last time you went, you cannot do that because you have to pay attention to a lot of details. It's similar. The facial analysis is like comparing apples to oranges. Very easy to distinguish. But when you want to do face recognition to identify uniquely every person, that's very hard. And going on, consent, signage, facial analysis, depending on how you do it, and we will get to that, you may not even need consent because there's no personally identifiable information part of the process. It is just aggregate information. And actually on this stage, on all the other stages around the PCMA conference, we are using this kind of analytics to understand whether people like or not the session, and this will complement the surveys and everything else that PCMA is doing. And he's just pointing at it.
So you're being tested right now, everybody. I just want to point out one thing. If you just go back to that slide,
Yep.
It says that we don't need, consent is not required.
Correct.
Would your advice be, though, that it's still maybe beneficial as an organizer to still get consent, do you think?
For the facial analysis, not really.
Okay.
But we do always recommend to have either some signage or put it in terms and conditions and somehow communicate to the audience so that they will know. But it is not needed. It is less intrusive than CCTV, and CCTV is like all over the place.
Absolutely. And how accurate?
So I think we will get to that on the next slide. So we will focus mostly on the facial analysis because this has a lower threshold. It is easier to implement and deploy. Most of the state-of-the-art systems, they can get over 90% accuracy across a range of different attributes, whether it is demographics, sentiment, age groups, facial expressions, so forth. So it is very accurate, and more importantly, you get all of the audience. After the session, how many of you are actually going to respond to the survey? Most people don't. That's the reality. Or when you take a flight or you go to a hotel, nobody responds to surveys. With this technology, it's possible to get all of the audience and understand how people are feeling, reacting, and so forth. So very accurate.
Why would we want to understand some of the attributes there?
So because the session of the title of the session is personalization. So you will want to understand which sessions resonate with which part of the audience. If I said something that offends a specific part of the audience, well, that's information that the speaker, the organizer should know to adjust and improve. It is part of the feedback process and creating better experiences. Because, like it or not, people like to belong in groups, and we feel we share attributes, values between each groups, and these have to be taken care of and considered when you design spaces, experiences, and so forth.
Yeah. And we're going to come on later to some real-world event examples and things, so we'll dig into that a little bit later on. So let's continue with exploring what a facial analysis system is.
So one of the things that people usually ask us is, how quick should the system be? And that's, by the way, we try to keep it very educational for all of you so that if somebody ever considers using the system, they know what questions to ask from vendors. So that's how we thought the first part of the presentation. And sometimes people assume, we need to be able to analyze facial expressions very quickly, 20, 30 frames per second to get meaningful insights. But based on most of the published research, most of the facial expressions that they are natural and you don't try to hide your feelings or anything like that, most of the actual applications, it takes 1/2 to 4 seconds to identify how a person is expressing themselves with the face. And this means that if a system is running at about analyzing 4 or 5 pictures/frames on a video per second, you get most of the information. And we have worked with event organizers where they allowed us to record the footage of the audience and then do the analysis with 5 frames per second, 10 frames per second, 20 frames per second. The insights are the same. So as long as you're at least 5 or above, you get a very good picture about how people are feeling.
Does that mean we just like keep the same facial expression for a long, long time? Or
Yes,
something?
you do. It's at least half a second. And if you go below half a second, that's how quickly you blink. Nobody smiles quicker than they blink. So that's an important thing.
So everybody could just like spend the rest of the session smiling so that we get really good feedback through Panos' system. That'd be amazing.
Or surprise, positive surprise. Another point, which I think is very important, even though it's not on the slides, you should never try to make an inference based on specific individuals. It will not work. You cannot understand what the person is thinking. But if you have 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 people in the audience and you continuously monitor them, then this is when you can do on the group level a better understanding.
And just to cover off one element, I guess the larger the scale the event is, it's purely a problem of more cameras, right?
To some extent, yes. Yeah. But after a certain point, when you hit a certain threshold, more cameras that don't give you more data. And we had organizers that they were saying, "Oh, let's cover every square inch of the place." And when you do the analysis after the event, whether you had 4 cameras or 10, it's the same insights, because once you have enough statistical sample, it doesn't really change that much.
Yeah, we're not trying to do it on an individual basis at that point anyway, are we?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, awesome. So and there's a little bit more to this as well, right?
Okay, so this will be a little bit more technical and nuanced, but it's very, very important. So nowadays, at least until very recently, most of the ways to deploy these technologies was you just record the footage and analyze it later, or you send everything to the cloud. Now, this has the following limitations. You know how difficult it is to stream anything when you are on site on a venue. You don't have enough bandwidth. But even if you did, the expenses of processing video in the cloud is very, very expensive. It gets very, very expensive very quickly. And even if you don't care about money either, the privacy aspects, they are very, very tricky and challenging. So streaming video from premises to the cloud, you are essentially streaming personally identifiable information, because if I have everybody's video, then you can go back and identify them. So one of the newer technologies is the Internet of Things or edge computing, where what you do, you have a lot of the processing happening on-site. So you have the sensors on-site processing the video in real time without ever storing it or transmitting it anywhere. And once you do it this way, and all the information is aggregated locally, the only thing you send to the cloud is between 9 and 10, we saw 50 faces, 20 happy, 30 not happy, and there's no way to go back and identify individuals. And once you do it in this way, it becomes very, very strong from a privacy and security point of view. And this is the recommended approach. It has cost savings implications. It means you can deploy without worrying about the internet, and you don't have to worry about privacy.
Yeah, and we all know that privacy is becoming a much more sensitive subject across the board. I know we're going to talk about a little bit about GDPR and DPA, and anybody with an iPhone has seen the way that they've treated Facebook recently, and you're probably getting the messages about IP relays and your IP being masked when you're searching online and things like that. So I think it's really important that we understand and talk about what we're doing here in the way that we understand it is anonymized and it is private and it is GDPR compliant, right, Panos?
No, and let me explain why. You don't even fall under GDPR if you do it in this way. So it's not that you're complying with GDPR. GDPR doesn't apply because GDPR applies when you have personally identifiable information. Once you don't have to worry about it, and that's why consent is not required. It is recommended but not required. And that's why DPA, also the data processing agreements, they're not applying either. So it's very, very safe to use. With this said, again, the distinction is if you do it on the aggregate is one thing, if you do it on the individual is a different thing. And this is where we had some of the governments in Europe flying people over to meet us and give them our recommendations on how to regulate moving forward. And some of our recommendations are the following. Don't do it on the individual levels. For example, if somebody's applying for a job, don't use this technology to determine whether or not somebody will get a job. If you're doing it for example, loans, don't use it in this context. But if you do it as a whole, as a process to understand the experience and behavior of people, that's very, very different.
Mm-hmm. On that, have you experienced or ever worked with an event where somebody has, as an attendee, contacted the organizer, has dug into it and said, what footage have you got of me? What information do you hold on me? Or anything like that. Have you experienced that yet?
No, we have not.
Okay.
And
That's a good
and
thing.
the reason is the following. It's very discreet. Like Anthony had to point out to the camera. I bet most of the people didn't even notice because it is very, very discreet. So how many times do you check for security cameras when you walk around? Well, I do because I'm in the business, but usually you don't. Yes.
So what are some of the metrics that we can gain by using this technology as part of our event?
So we have listed some of them here. So the first one is impressions. And by the way, to a great extent, everything you do in digital marketing, in virtual events, right now you can replicate on site as well. So the first one is impressions. And these are non-unique, again, because we don't identify or distinguish individuals. It's impressions. And impressions give you an idea about traffic, density, frequency, times of the day, the days of the week, and so forth. So you get a very good idea about footfall without, again, crossing the privacy line. Another one is age groups, and we have done deployments in airports, in retail, where you can see how different demographic age groups or different biological sex behave. And to this one of the questions we always get is, well, somebody might not identify as one gender or the other, and we're saying that's fine. We are focusing on biological sex first. But second, you can also assign a confidence level on the prediction of the algorithms. And if the algorithm is not sure because it's not very clear, then this person is skipped. So on average, we recommend skipping about 10% of the people because most of the people do identify with one or the other or biologically. But beyond that, you can do facial expressions. And on the facial expressions and sentiment, we always try to push for focusing on one, which is positive sentiment. If you have, feelings such as expressions such as surprise, positive, smiles, all of these things, you can all put them together and understand, people's experience. But disgust, anger, these are very, very infrequent feelings or expressions, and it's very hard to capture them and do something with that meaningful. Another thing you can do is dwell times. So as long as somebody stays in the field of view and they don't go to another room and they stay in front of the field of view, you can tell how long they have stayed in the space. And the last thing which is possible, but again we advise against it, is race. So you could determine to a certain extent race. Again, you have people who are mixed or it's unclear and so forth. And because of the sensitivity of the aspect, we always recommend don't do it at all. You will not gain anything, stay away from it. But instead, what you can do, you can have an inclusivity index. So for example, you can say, my target in the audience is to have this many people of this group, of this group, of this group. And then the system can give you how close or far away you are from your targets without reporting actual groups or demographics or so forth. So this way, you need to be able to measure. You need to be able to measure to be inclusive. What is your audience? But you can do it in a safe way.
Yeah. And just before we go to a question, in full transparency, I'm also working with Panos on our events, Event Tech Live Las Vegas in April and in London in November, because some of these metrics are really important to us. Anthony's done an amazing job of trying to give us those emoji feedback, that live feedback on site, and I want to use this technology to understand how is the audience reacting to content. Did we do a good job selecting a speaker? Did we do a good enough job with the topic? Actually, we've had a session and a speaker unable to make it on the second day. Is there a session that resonated extremely well that we can invite them back on second day so we get another great opportunity to present that content? Do we do things in future? And then on the exhibiting trade show, can we provide data and information to exhibitors so they can actually perform better while they're there on site, getting a better experience, better ROI? I mean, some companies spend millions of dollars on trade show activations, and I know Philips and Canon are two companies that actually use technology like this to make changes to their stand design and build overnight so they get better performance and better pull-through on their event. Anthony, do we have a question?
A very, very quick one that I'm curious on the expression side of things. You mentioned positive ones. I've been accused of having resting bitch face. Is it possible that could skew the data in any way, or have you come across that?
I love this question, and the answer is the following. So, because as I said, when we detect a face, without identifying it, you can follow it around based on the position, momentum, and so forth. And every face is analyzed multiple times per second. So let's say we collect 200, 300 scores for you in particular. We can set a baseline, and then we don't just look at the value or the intensity of the expressions, but the shape of the distribution. And this is how you can, to a certain extent, address this issue. That's the first part. And the second part is you always want to compare. So you use this like A/B testing. So point A versus point B. So there's always a comparison baseline. So you're doing it off of that.
Can we do some comparison on some other technologies that are out there? BLE and radio frequency, and how facial analysis compares to that as well.
And by the way, with this, I want to say that we never ever advocate using just one tool, just facial analysis and nothing else.
Yes.
You always have to combine sources. Look at the surveys, look at the context, look at RFID you want, and so forth. Combine everything, and that's how you make the best decisions. Now, RFID, I think it's very well used. Our VP of Sales, Art, is sitting there. He was the co-founder and CEO of Alliance Tech that introduced the technology in the events before they got acquired by Cvent. Very, very useful technology, but it has some limitations. The privacy is one, because you are uniquely identifying every single person and following them around. You all know how expensive and cumbersome it is to install, so it has some challenges. And BLE is the same thing. If somebody doesn't have it on their phone, or you have to put it on the badge, it has these logistic challenges. So the difference with facial analysis is you don't need to do any of these things. You just put the camera, leave it there, it works. Very, very easy, no privacy implications. And it is a paradox or oxymoron that we're using cameras which have better privacy properties, but if you do it right, it actually has better privacy properties.
One of the things that I think I'm most excited about for our event, and we've got it kind of happening here a little bit, is that passive attendee tracking of in and out of sessions, right? So you understand where people went and how long they spent at those sessions, which of those, and that goes back to that personalization, right? So you can track that, and the next time the event comes around, or maybe it's the on-demand content, maybe it's you repurposing that content, you resend it, and other similar content they might have missed, right?
So not just that, we have some event organizers that they go so strongly on the technology that they will monitor in real time, and if a speaker is killing the mood, they will just get them off the stage. Don't get us off the stage.
Let's go.
But they will get speakers off the stage, and they will do something to bring the energy back, especially in political rallies or something more B2C focused, in order to keep the energy flowing. So it is very, very powerful technology, yeah.
Okay, so I guess let's move on to the event organizer's perspective, right?
Yes. So that's your perspective, Adam. So.
I guess so. But you're working with a huge amount of organizers. You're working with Informa. I know you're working with
Let's not say all the names. Yeah.
Okay.
We don't always have permission.
They're working with Informa.
Too late.
Yeah. I can picture it. It's fine. Randy can come and have a word with me afterwards. Yeah, let's dig into this a little bit. Like how are event organizers perceiving this technology on the whole?
So, and this is where we did not always expect this kind of response from the market. It's going, thankfully, very well. And we all know how tough the pandemic was, especially for physical experiences. But in most cases, we have most clients booking second, third, fourth time, and what we get is, what else do you have? Which is, it's very, very telling. And again, it's the combination of getting data without crossing the privacy line, because most of the big companies, there's a big shift in most corporations. Everything is shifting towards strategy. And the best way to move in the right direction, you need data to make the right decisions. Mm-hmm. So we see this shift quite a bit. And if you want, we can go through a few specific examples. Again, we cannot mention names, but we work with individual exhibitors. By the way, Dalia, your booth that you are there, you have the highest scores. You're doing really, really well. You're doing really, really well. So we were looking at that yesterday. But this is one case where this consumer electronics brand, and we started working with them on their booth. They had 2 booths on each show that they were going to, and we set up about 10 devices per booth to actually understand what is going on. And very quickly, let me go to the next one. There we go. Some of the observations we saw was that the number of demos they're offering compared with the traffic around the booth was low, which means there was the opportunity for them to get more demos completed if they change a few things. We saw that one activation, one specific room that they had, it was underutilized. It was 44% lower than the other rooms that they were having inside their booth. Or that some activations, they were pulling one specific demographic group more than the other, and it shouldn't. They wanted to have it more inclusive.
Can I just interject here? This is that old adage, especially from an event organizer's perspective, that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? And everybody who's in event marketing and designing booth activations probably thinks their design is the best thing since sliced bread. But actually, in real terms, when people start to interact with that, it might not be translating in the way that they thought. They might be using a design from one event that worked really well, and it's just not working well for this different audience and things. And in some cases, those bookers of exhibition stands or those designers are not necessarily the ones that are actually activating the event themselves. They're not there in person, so they can't see any of this in real time. They're just waiting for that feedback from their booth staff members and things like that to say, how did the event go? How many leads did we capture? So we really want to be empowering our exhibitors with this so we can have real practical conversations with them, especially if they feel that you're not getting the attraction to their booth or the leads or the conversations that they actually wanted. This is putting that onus back on them as a little bit as well, isn't it, right?
Absolutely. So most of the reports and the data, they always make it to the C-level executives, and all the CEOs and the names that get this kind of data, because that's how they're designing their strategy and go-to-market. But also from the organizer perspective, it's the objections. You have an exhibitor complaining they didn't get enough traffic. Is this the case or not? If this is the case, how can we help them do better on the next show? So we keep them. Just the retention of the customers is very, very important. So some of the actions we took in this case was we told them, you know what, you have traffic, but you don't do enough demos based on our benchmarks. Increase the number of stations for demos, increase how much staff you have on site. One of the booths, it was not working at all. They ended up dropping it completely to redesign it from scratch to make it better, which is very, very important. And we will go then on the results. Just by dropping a booth that was not working, they saved about $100K per event. That's a massive, massive cost saving for something that doesn't work. By increasing the number of demos, changing a little bit the layout and so forth, they saw a 294% increase in the number of demos they're offering with the same booth size. That's a massive, massive increase in value received and obtained from its trade floor. So this is our approximate cost for the two booths, $15K, just if you want to have,
And if I could just say there as well, obviously cost saving on booth, that might be booth build, that might be design. It's not necessarily square meters, is it? Or I would look at that as well as a show organizer and say, okay, maybe they want to reduce their size, but now that's freeing up budget. Where else can I put that within my event that they can get benefit from? Stage sponsorships, other things like that.
Exactly right, exactly right. And as the organizer, you don't want to be short-sighted. You want them to have a good experience, getting good ROI, because they will come again and again and again and again. So the overall ROI from the analytics in this case, we estimate to about 14x, and you don't get 14x a lot of the time. But this is the power of analytics. And I don't know if we have it on these slides, so we don't have it on these slides, but we are using our technology for our booths. And we started Q4 with collecting about 20 leads per show. And at the end of the year, we were at 50 leads per show per day. That's the daily. We went from 20 leads per day to 50 leads per day. Same booth size, same traffic, just by changing the way everything is set up on site. It has a massive, massive impact in the bottom line.
So Panos will be training everybody at their exhibitor masterclasses on how to set up booths, right? That's the big business.
Well, we do get a lot of insights. And the other thing is also what we do, every time we work with someone, all of the data goes into a pool. And then we create benchmarks. So you know where you fall. You get insights of what always works, what doesn't work. We have done food shows. And everybody in food shows assumes that food samples is the most important. And if you have, for example, pizza, you have to bring ovens, you have to go through the fire compliance and so forth. But we have seen from data that digital displays, products and so forth, without any food samples, can work just as well. And this is a way as an organizer to go to smaller brands that they don't have the budget to bring an oven or whatever and say, hey, based on our data, we have seen very clearly that you will have a very good ROI if you come on the show. You don't need a huge budget. Give it a try. And that's how you can attract more exhibitors.
Awesome. So leadership conference then, slightly different format.
This is a little bit different. This is actually one of the top 5 thought leadership conferences. It's a very, very exclusive event. It was a very good experience. And one of the areas they had about 8 areas with different, trends or the future, what's coming up next, 5 stations for each. Very exclusive audience. And they want to understand which experiences have the most traffic, where do people stay the longest, how are they feeling about that. So the first thing we were able to do, without using any identifiable trackers, RFID, without anything like that, we were able to give them a unique count of an estimate of the unique counts from impressions of how much traffic they had, and it actually matched very closely to what they were expecting. They were very, very happy because this went to the CEO of the organization. But beyond that, they were able to take the data, go to sponsors, and say, hey, this is your ROI. And we have done this with IMEX as well. We're doing it with you, Adam. We're doing it with PCMA. It's one thing to say, hey, come and put a sponsorship on my show. It's a different thing saying, well, we will have these many hundreds of impressions. People stay this long. That's how how they were feeling. Sentiment was 30% higher in your area versus the other areas. They were more receptive. Much easier way to get people to sponsor and double down on that. The other thing we were able to identify was which activations were talking to which demographic groups and which topics or demos were the most successful, so that next year when they redesigned the event, they can make these improvements to optimize their experience.
And I guess
next steps.
Next steps.
So as I said, most companies when they start working with us, they do like quite a bit, and then they say, okay, what else can we do? What else can we do? So for next year, what we're looking to do, adjusting the immersive experience with them, but also we have launched a new feature that we could detect QR codes on badges 6 or 7 feet away automatically. And if people consent, this is where you need consent and opt-in. If you get the opt-in, then you can start understanding. This person went to this activation, they stayed this long, they went back again the next day. That's how they were feeling, and you get a single score per person to understand which individual was interested in what thing the most. So you get a sorted list. So Adam was most interested in Dallas booth. So he will get an email following up talking about his experience at Dallas booth, so that he will be able to do it. Art, he really liked Anchor's booth, so where we have the devices as well. So he will get a follow-up email for that. So you're able to optimize follow-ups for sales performance, and especially in this case, everybody was a C-level executive. We're talking about millions of potential impact in terms of deals and pipeline and so forth. So it has a very real impact.
I won't mention any names, but I think one of the things that I will say that I found so interesting about the event teams that Panos is working at, the data and the analysis and the feedback and just the value of what you're doing for them means that they're now introducing him into other business divisions within the same organization, wanting to look at implementing the same technology within very consumer-facing opportunities, customer engagement opportunities, right? So
100%. So a couple of examples. So when you fly out through the airport, you have the flight information displays. And we did an analysis with an international airport in Houston, Texas. And this is where we were able to see that the older the demographics, the lower the sentiment score, the higher the dwell time, which was a signal that maybe they need to clean up the interfaces a little bit more to make it easier to understand and see. And we did an A/B test. Some screens had a new format, which was clean, better font, bigger size, and the other ones were the same. And the one that had the new format, after 1 month, we saw that the sentiment scores were higher, dwell times were smaller, everything was pointing to a better experience. So everything has been redesigned in all the airports accordingly to make it easier for people to get the information. That's one example. We're working in retail. So let's say, I'll just say an example. This is, let's say you're Coca-Cola and you have, all your product in the shelves. You know your sales, they go up and down. Do you know why? You have no idea. Well, if you have this technology, you know how many people walked by, what percent stopped, how long did they stay, how they were feeling, where the sales came through. So you're able to create a full funnel and understanding the behavior of consumers and which designs, lights, and so forth work. And you can even take it one step further, where you can combine the technology with a digital display, and you can change the content in real time depending on who is in front of it. So I will see one content, you will see different content, and so forth. So you can truly personalize the experience, again, without crossing the privacy line.
I'm just looking forward to them crappy little buttons with the smiley faces saying, how was your experience today?
So this was one thing, because a lot of the times they put this in the restrooms and nobody's touching it after they put them.
Yeah, nobody wants to do that.
And they wanted a better way to measure.
Yeah.
And that does wrap up the digital transformation stage for PCMA Convening Leaders 2023.